In the previous video, we focused on the embodied carbon during the construction process. And in this video, we're going to look at the operational carbon that will come from operating these buildings over the next 50 or 60 or maybe even 100 years. We have a new HKUST net zero building standards document that's aligned with our net zero action plan. This takes the place of our high performance building standards that we've had for the past 10 years, but is now upgraded and specifically dealing with some of the elements that we need for our net zero action plan. In a previous video, we talked about the two main strategies for decarbonizing buildings. One, we shrink the electricity consumption to as little as possible. And secondly, we increase the amount of on site renewables to the greatest extent possible. And that's how we can get to a net zero building. So let's focus on the renewables first. The main technology available to us in Hong Kong is solar. So the design should prioritize this first. And when I say prioritize, we don't mean find available space on a rooftop after all the large equipment and cooling towers have all been installed. What I mean is focus on the solar first and build everything else around it. Think of the rooftop as basically one large solar power plant. Every bit of that space needs to be accounted for solar. And in fact, even more than that space can be accounted for if we have designs that include overhangs, like this example in Singapore. Afterwards, we need to look at the facades. Now, the southern and the eastern and the western facades are good locations. They won't generate all day long, but they will be getting enough sunshine that they can contribute to the overall generation for the building. Now, there are examples of facades that are simply panels serving as the building cladding, like these that you see here, but they don't also have to be quite so boring. Consider these designs from a company called Solar Lab. They're designing facades that integrate PV in ways that are elegant and colorful and very attractive. But in fact, you don't have to go very far to find other examples. Right here on our HKUST campus, we have renderings of PV integrated facades on two of our buildings. One is Tower D and the other is SSQ Tower 19. By the time you see this video, they might have already been completed. Now, these designs are developed by one of our faculty members in collaboration with a local design team. So you may be able to see how they've been able to integrate very elegant and pretty facades that don't look like solar panels. In fact, they don't even have to be black. You can see there are different colors that are available in different shapes and sizes. Now, finally, don't forget that the rest of the building footprint is also available for solar. So we can look at things like solar pavers on walkways and footpaths. We could also evaluate covered walkways that can both shade pedestrians and also generate electricity. Now, keep in mind that the Net Zero Action Plan is predicated on our ability to maximize all available spaces for generating renewable electricity. Now we know that the renewables will not be enough to satisfy all of the needs of the building, but that's okay. It doesn't have to. Remember that our action plan is based on the renewables generating revenue. The revenue needs to be big enough so that we can use that to buy down the emissions over time. The net zero building standards have two elements. The first one is performance targets. And so we talked about the embodied uh, carbon requirement of 500 kilograms of CO2 equivalent for every square meter of space. And so there are a couple of performance targets here as well. But the majority are what we call comply or explain requirements. And so that includes sustainability design strategies that will be evaluated on each project. Now, we don't say that every single one needs to be implemented in the project, that there may be some that are not feasible, but it's very important that everyone needs to be evaluated. And if we cross it off the list, we really need the justification in the form of a technical feasibility study containing the calculations or drawings to show why it might not work in that case. In other words, we don't want to cross anything off the list unless we've thoroughly evaluated it first. To make it easier, we have made the comply or explain. sections aligned with the Beam Plus framework, which many of you may already be familiar with. And you'll see that many of the optional credits in Beam Plus are actually requirements for us at HKUST. For example, the ICDM number 4, lifecycle costing, is optional in Beam Plus, but it is a must have for us at HKUST. You'll also see that we have some additional requirements beyond Beam Plus. For example, ICDM number 17 is about the educational components. It's a bonus point for Beam Plus, but since we're an educational institution, this is a requirement. And we have additional requirements that say that design teams will allow our researchers to evaluate data and contribute to the designs in ways that test new interventions. This is what we call using the campus as a living lab, and it's one of the highest priorities for us here at HKUST. In the next video, we'll return to lifecycle thinking and we'll focus our expectations on the use of lifecycle analysis and lifecycle costing accounting and how they are factors in our net zero action plan.